I'm Sarah Sedwick. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to have a quick demo of a warm-up exercise, just a timed painting. I'm giving my Arches oil paper, which I've got taped up onto my plywood drawing board, a quick bath with some clear Gamsol, which you can see right over here in this jar lid next to my palette on the palette cam. When I work on acrylic primed surfaces like the Raymar panels that I love to paint on, I don't do this. I'll give them often a tone with gesso and some pigment, but I don't give them a clear Gamsol bath. Oh, and you don't want the page to feel too wet and runny. What we're just trying to do is cut down on the papery feel of that paper. Arches oil paper is specifically made and treated in the fibers to take oil paint like a pro without needing to gesso or do anything to it before you paint on it. But I find that that kind of papery texture can be kind of unpleasant until you get the first pass of paint on it. So I like to nip that in the bud out of the gate by giving it a coat, just a little bath with clean Gamsol to cut down on the dryness. And you can see that my block in is sliding on with a nice flowy feel to the paint there. Okay, so when I'm doing timed exercises to warm up, and I've got my clock set for 20 minutes, if I feel like painting a little longer after the 20 minutes, hey, that's all good. But when I do timed exercises as a warm up, the idea is to not get too hung up on the drawing. Maybe I'm testing out a still life setup for a quote unquote real painting, or maybe I'm just testing an iteration of one for something that might turn into a fully fleshed out piece later on. I think those apple slices are way too big. Way too big. But drawing isn't really the point of this, and so I don't want to focus too much on being a perfectionist with my drawing. There's that nice big fold right there. And a cast shadow. This is that fold. But just blocking in the basics really quickly. Yeah, we're going to fit those apples in there. And moving on to the rest of the painting. The part we all think of as painting, which is brush with color on canvas. And we are going to get there. So I've got a cast shadow here. I want to spend just a few minutes on this block in. That little piece, yeah, I made those apple slices way too big to start with. And that's all right, sort of, because they're in the foreground, they're coming towards us, but I want everything to work relative to each other proportionately and fit on the page. The handle of the knife starts about there, so we've got that apple slice here, and then we've got this apple slice here, and we're really going to keep it on the napkin. I want to make these apple slices exaggerated in size because they are coming toward the eye, but I need to rein that in. It's scale in still life has its challenges for sure. Do I paint this thing larger than life size, smaller than life size? If I only paint things life size, then when I want to scale up and do a larger painting, do I just have to set up an enormous still life? Maybe I do. That's the wrong place to get Gamsol there. Anyway, I'm just trying to get warmed up today. Warm up my painting arm, warm up my seeing eyes. Maybe I haven't been in the studio for a few days, and so it's great to have tools in my arsenal where there's not a lot of pressure on still life setup, which we know can be kind of intimidating and tough. And there's not a lot of pressure, there's no pressure actually on composition because I didn't think about it at all, which is pretty rare for me. Usually I'm a big planner, but not today. Just kind of dived in and went for it. Tip of that knife. And now I want to start indicating, generally when I do an underpainting or a loose block in, I pull out some lights, but Arches oil paper doesn't really like to have lights pulled out. Once you put paint, and this is something I think a lot of people aren't super comfortable with about it, once you put paint down on Arches oil paper, it's kind of there. And I mean, sure, I could really try to scrub it out, but pulling out delicate details like I might in a more traditional underpainting for me is not really going to be an option with Arches oil paper, so I just leave those darks. If I've put them down, maybe emphasizing what's in light and what's in shadow here. Never seem to be able to get those handles feeling long enough on these knives. You're gonna get bogged down and spend a lot of time on any one aspect of painting. I definitely think that the underpainting is not a terrible place to be doing that. Um, Getting your drawing to a place where you're really happy with it before you move on to adding color. But at the same time, we don't want to get so precious about our block in. I'm going to make that a little bit curved. That we then are reluctant to paint over it because, that's coming. We're going to paint over it. And we need to be all right with that when it happens. So, not getting too invested in the drawing. Correct, but not obsessive. And then I can start coming in and maybe starting to notice where there are some pops of some interesting stuff going on. Some darkest darks. There are some beautiful, interesting color notes. Ooh, I need my medium open here. Leaking? Something's leaking. I definitely have oil all over my table. Very weird. And I can come in and start putting some random color pops in because I see some beautiful things happening. And the idea is that it's easy to start out with a few color risks and then walk back from them than it is to add those pops of adventurous color in later on. I don't want to just feel like I'm putting this weird teal everywhere, so let's do some other pops. These can stay or they can be covered over later on. Places where I like to put adventurous color right off the bat, edges of cast shadows. That's not an edge of a cast shadow. That is. Um, Transitions, where light and dark meet. And I'm working with a number 2 round brush right now, which is my drawing brush. And there's a serious indicator going on here that if I'm starting to switch over toward color, I really need to switch over from that 2 round. I love it as a drawing brush. It is my chosen, feels like a pencil to me, but it does not put paint on the way I like it to lay down round brushes in general, unless they're pretty worn out. Will give you kind of a mushy, not mushy, but like these paint ridges that you can sort of observe right there that I just put down. Things, something like that. Okay, I've got solvent-free gel on my palette. I think that's going to be too light, that shadow side of the apple, but I'm going to leave that there. And this has really some orange. It's kind of glowing, this apple slice. I'm going to put some nice saturated orange on it and let the rest kind of slide into, yeah, into that more neutral. And then I don't have anything mixed for it really, but that side of the apple in the light, mostly going to be some yellow mixed with some warm white. I'm using solvent-free gel as one of my mediums, and I'm using M-gram walnut alkyd medium as another of my mediums. The gel is a little thicker, it's got more body, and the walnut alkyd medium thinner and more runny. Put some pink in there. Good for larger passages like negative space, fabric. Don't like to have to be doing things twice. Let's just put it down and leave it alone. Oh, I have another apple slice to deal with, to reckon with. A black cat outside of the glass sliding door to my studio. I think he's trying to get a free painting lesson. Not one of mine. Go away. It's a private lesson. All right. There's that guy in shadow, a little bit of glow happening at the top here too. We'll put that with one brush stroke and then we'll leave that alone. I really want to get into that whole apple. When I start with the whole apple, I'm going to start with the light side and work my way down toward the darks, the lightmost facing plane. Now this scenario is kind of backlit, but the top of that apple is really getting strong light all the way across the top plane. And so that's going to be the lightest and the most saturated color. We do have some variegation on this apple. So there's some yellows and greens, which really mix in my eye to become kind of an orange. It's pretty. There's lots of different colors up there. I don't need to get in and, paint chunk. Old paint. I don't really need to get in and start doing, stripes and striations and stuff. Just a few brush strokes to indicate that that's happening and then get out. Leave it alone. If you have too much Gamsol on that surface of the Arches oil paper before you dive in and start painting, you may find the paint is not sticking, it's kind of beating up on the surface. If you do find that the paint is beating up and not quite sticking onto the surface, it's probably because you used a little too much of that Gamsol as you were toning your canvas or giving your Arches oil paper a bath prior to starting to put on color. So you can, the solution for that is you could get out a hair dryer and zap it. That definitely works. You can wait a few minutes and proceed. That works too. Let some of that Gamsol evaporate. Hopefully you've all got a good air filter running in your studio. Or you could just move over and work on another part of the painting. Brown, raw sienna. Get this stem taken care of with just a couple of gentle touches with the side of the brush and leave that alone. Get out. Yeah, don't want to do too much there. Okay, we're moving. Maybe we'll give it a little bit of a green and yellow highlight over there. This is a very pretty apple, I gotta say. I rather like it. That's yellow ochre, straight yellow ochre coming around the back. Some of this paint is mixed. I want it more warmy yellow than that. Some of this paint is mixed from a previous painting that I did, which was, I think some of this palette was also used for these apples. And some of it was used for some lemons. So I have a variety of reds and yellows going on. Continues to be very orange all the way down here. Notice I'm not painting over previous brush strokes. I'm really well, yeah. As soon as I said that, I started doing it. What I'm trying to do is lay pieces of paint. I just want to push that up a little bit. Lay pieces of paint next to other pieces of paint, not repainting areas that I have already painted. Except that I'm doing that right now. Sorry. I want the thickest, richest, roundest feeling paint to be happening right there on that apple because that apple coming the closest to your eye and thick paint really advances toward the viewer's eye. Now I'm going to try putting that highlight on again right there, just softly. It's not a super shiny apple. Okay, let's go down toward the darks. Oof, I don't have anything great mixed up for the darks. I need a little more green in there. I go into my pre-mixed greens that I have at the ready for other things. Oh, this apple does not really come in front of this guy in the photo reference. I'm going to pretend that it does. Reflected light. And we're going to go back to that brown. Making decisions kind of quickly, not thinking about matching color as much as I am thinking about matching value. Bonus points to all of you who are watching and talking along and said value. Color gets all the credit. Value does all the work. Let's put a little purplish reflection of the ground in here. Oh God, I picked up something. See, this is why we should never really play with phthalo blue. Just always wants to insert itself into the situation and cause trouble. Real troublemaker there. I'm going to leave that alone for now. But before I get out completely, I'm going to come down in here and make that pretty. Yeah, one brush stroke can do that. Since I've got red on the brush, I'm making this nice brownish red. I'm going to finish up these apples. I putting their sort of skins on. That guy has a really bright reflected light. This guy gets a little light as he comes up toward the light source. I don't think that goes dark enough down there. Let's see. All right, the knife. The knife looks awfully blue-violet to me. One thing I definitely want to do with the knife, check my values, make sure that the knife is lining up with, I need a black or a dark metal color. And mix my brown and my blue together. That's really going to just be implied. I don't know. I really want to go that much darker on the knife than that. We're going to leave that alone for a while. I think a lot of what goes on the knife is going to be accomplished with the negative space around it. And then we go to a kind of blue-white. No. I can firm that up and clean it up and make it more pretty looking when I come to put the negative space on. How's my timer? Some kind of timer just went off for me. About 20 minutes of working on this. We're going to see what happens if we go for 40. That's the thing about telling yourself you only have to do something for X number of minutes. I'm going to go for a walk, but I only have to walk for 30 minutes. And then you get out there, you're listening to your favorite audiobook, your current audiobook, get really into it, and you walk for 45 minutes. And painting with the timer is the exact same idea. When the timer goes off and you don't want to stop, you win. That's the goal, is to get yourself started. And then you don't want to stop. Now, for me, I just want to make sure that I keep moving quickly. So I want to be bearing that timer in mind, whether I actually stop or not, because it's that quickness. Of the painting that leads to what I call the happy accident factory, where things happen, maybe not on purpose, but they end up being good and we keep them. I want to blend that too much, just blend it a little. Do I want to darken that at all? Maybe down there. Okay, I can't wait to get into some of that negative space around there to really um, firm up my drawing, but I'm gonna hold off for a little. Test out some of my other colors. Okay, where to next? Well, let's test out my negative space colors. My rag is getting a little crazy. I was just checking something. Let's get into some of these colors on the ground. My darkest dark shadows that I mix for the ground, they're probably too chromatic. May want to go in even darker, especially under here. And then maybe we'll go back to something more colorful. Soften that edge, soften that edge. Okay, great. Because I knew I wanted a really dark, nice dark cast shadow under here. I had to darken the form shadow a little bit to meet it. That's all good. It is blue though. And one of the things that I find that I tend to do a lot is make my cast shadows too dark. So I'm always thinking, do I need more air in that shadow? All right, don't paint over it 6 times. Just do it once. Be done with it. And that guy comes up. That's too light now. And that one's going to come up and over the edge of this. I love doing my cast shadows before I do my ground in the light. The ground in the light is really pretty dark here also. It's very green. Give it some sap green there. Let it mix in. Can't really hurt. And the light part of that comes up and blocks that from view. This guy's cast shadow comes down like so. I love doing exercises like these in my workshops. We're always doing something to warm up, loosen up in my workshops. And using the timer or using a bigger brush for an exercise. Two of my favorites. And I have lots of workshops coming up this year all around the country, and even one in France this year. Probably more European stuff coming up in 2025. And information about all those can be found on my website, sarahsedwick.com. A couple of the ones, speaking of this knife, that I'm really excited about later this year. I'm teaching a workshop on metal and glass in the still life, which is a particular kind of motif popular in still life. Metal and two of my favorite textures to deal with. I'm teaching that workshop with a, same focus that a lot of my other workshops have: composition, color mixing, lots of great critiques and evaluations of our work as a group, and generally just a lot of fun. But the metal and glass workshops will have a specific focus on the illusionism, capturing the textures, speaking the language of metal and glass to the viewer. All right, I'm getting way too carried away here. And those two workshops are in Boston. One's in Boston in June. The other one is in Nashville in September. And these are two of my favorite studios, both studios that I've taught at before. Looking forward to returning to. The one in Boston is called Slow River Studio, and the one in Nashville is called Warehouse 521. Both great places to be familiar with if you are a workshop junkie and love taking workshops all over the place. Good places to know about. I'll put a link to those down below. Ground in the light. So my cast shadows are pretty much handled. Cast shadows on the ground, not so much. Maybe those come later. Or maybe they come now. Well, I have this little jar lid full of Gamsol when I want to add just a few droplets of Gamsol to my paint as I'm working. Dry papery stuff. I'll reach in there Really care about those little smears of red. Those kind of shadows on the fabric. When I'm painting fabric, I'm always trying to think really geometrically and definitely be playing the thought game of what's facing the light, what's facing away from the light. Planes. You can see that this metal is really dark, so it's just a few bright highlights on them. And that's the main way that we say metal to the viewer. We do really darks with a few choice bright highlights. And probably not every highlight that you're seeing necessary there. I digress. I don't want to do the ground in the light, and I'm not sure what that's about. All right, let's get to it. This kind of plane of the cloth, I really loaded up the brush a lot. Sort of a mid-tone. Comes down over here and does one of these. And then it goes to a light. And I think that my light is not light enough. It's more saturated, but it's not light enough. Soften the edge of that cast shadow. And we're going to pull a little bit of that dark paint down there. I think that's all going to be good and helpful. White, phthalo. The cast shadow colors feel a little funny to you, or if you've done something that you think is maybe too adventurous with the color in those cast shadows, give it a little time. Like, give it a chance to work. And it's not until you fill in the light values around it that you can really make that judgment call. So don't be afraid to go adventurous in your shadow colors. It's what happens with the stuff in the light that's going to make or break it, make it correct or incorrect. Value wise. And gotta get comfortable with leaving some things that your overthinking monkey mind might be calling mistakes. You gotta get a little more comfortable with leaving those be temporarily while you do some more work in another part of the painting, giving it a chance to get figured out. Maybe it's not a mistake. It's really hard to tell without context. Context. It needs an occlusion shadow under there. I think that's going to work just fine. Okay, this guy gets lighter down there too, but it's not that light. Neutralize it with some gray. Meh. Great. It's not light enough. When you're painting alla prima, you get a few chances to go back over with more layers of wet paint. But not infinite chances. 2, maybe 3 passes before you need to start doing what? Scraping away. You can add more color. Fix mistakes, make adjustments. See, it's that light color around it that really makes the cast shadows work. Clean up the edge of that with the negative space when I get there. And now come in and clean that top of the knife up. So I was able to have brush strokes going like that diagonally across the knife sideways because I knew I was going to come back in with the negative space and be able to clean that up. Using a bigger brush. If you want to paint faster, use a bigger brush. It's the rule. Faster and looser. The prescription is a bigger brush. Soft edge on that cast shadow there. Beautiful. Okay, let's come behind here. Put a soft edge on that cast shadow too. We can make it a little smaller if we feel like it got too big. There's something about this guy that's not quite working for me. I don't know that it's not working. It's a little off. Maybe he just needs his negative space filled in too. As that cast shadow comes out and then it goes right up against there. It comes out again and kind of goes over the edge of the napkin where it curves. Picked up some of that darkness. Don't be afraid to go outside the lines. And always clean them up from the other direction. Now that cast shadow's irritating me. Chunks of paint out of there. Come back in and fix those. Mm-mm. Nope. Yeah, that works. Perfection isn't the point. Excellent. Get too fiddly in any one area and you're gonna regret it probably. All right, I want to go back and look and see if there are any opportunities for anything that I'm missing out on. Nice lost edge there between the knife, the lights on the knife blade. I don't think I've got enough reflected light under that guy. Maybe not here either. It's dark there. And then into the cast shadow, which is lighter. No, we'll let that darkness be part of shadow. A little blending to turn that fold, just a little. Yeah, don't fix it too much. It might be fine. This is going into the cast shadow here. Which darkens, and there's some lighter stuff in the cast shadow under here, which I can't explain. So we won't even try. I think it's coming from a window. And all these crusties in my paint. You know, if you have those, if you get those crusty things in your paint, you just wait until the painting dries and then you can wipe them off. Hopefully, I mean, brush them off. And that also applies to like bugs and stuff that get in your paint when you're plein air painting. Hopefully you won't leave a hole on the canvas. Sometimes it does, and then you'd have to go back in with paint. Okay, that cast shadow is handled. Do I have any other cast shadows? Yeah, I do. I have the cast shadow of the knife here, which needs to be darker. I don't know how light I want to make that, but I don't want to make the cast shadow too dark. It's pretty thin, but it doesn't have to be as thin as I need it to be because I'm going to clean it up with the negative space as with everything else. So that light negative space is going to be a chore. Everything on this canvas is pretty much handled up to this point. I'm sorry for keeping on hitting the camera. It's right next to me. Let's do some light negative space. Where do I want my lightest, brightest spots of negative space to be? I don't actually really want any light. I'll pick one afterwards. All my characters are congregated on this napkin. So what I really will probably do is use light, bright spots on the napkin, soft edge there, to indicate. I might put one right there in the middle. And we'll scrub that all the way down to the end. This paper that I'm working on is half of a sheet of 12 by 16, so 8, It's not 6 by 8. I don't know how big this paper is. I think that's a 12 by 16 pad. But this is larger than 6 by 8. Soft edges on your cast shadows, not by taking a clean brush, but doing it in the paint, as I like to say. So having a bunch of paint on your brush, maybe most of the paint comes off in the first couple of strokes, and then as you come up to the shadow, you got a little less paint on your brush, and you sort of work that in to the edge of the shadow, making it feel very shadowish, and then back to the palette to get some more paint. Okay. When you pick up color from the edge of that cast shadow, you probably want to go back to the palette, get more paint. Don't be too precious about those edges of your cast shadow. Certainly not, gonna be too precious about the end of that knife. Don't really want to paint that anyway. Where you spend your most time and attention in a painting is where the viewer will also spend their most time and attention in your painting. If you're just not that into painting something, don't sweat it. You don't have to do too much to it. Give the viewer enough that it's believable. And then go lavish your love and care where you feel attracted and drawn. Okay, if I keep taking the tape up off of the edges and corners here, my canvas will fall. I'm heading off to teach a workshop this weekend in Sacramento, and then I'm going to go on to Scottsdale. These are two of my favorite studios to visit. I'm very excited to see old friends, make some new friends. All of these are still life painting workshops. One is called dynamic still life, and the other one's called loose realism, and there isn't much difference between the two. Slight differences. In both of them, we talk about composition. In dynamic still life, maybe slightly more so. Combination of me setting up still lifes for the class and the class practicing setting up still lifes for themselves, full guidance and support. So if still life setup is something that freaks you out and you've been hesitating on coming to one of my workshops because you've thought, oh, I have to set up a still life. Oh, that would be such a pain. And then I'd have all these people watching me. Well, when you walk into my workshop classroom, what you see is a room full of still lifes that are already set up, and we share them. They're communal. So I put 4 or 5 artists around a table that's got 3 or 4 options for a beautiful still life already set up on it. And you just settle down at your easel and pick out which little vignette on the table is calling your name today. We focus on mixing colors, coming up with successful compositions, cueing into our artistic inspiration and intuition to make those decisions about composition, meaning what's a good composition based on our own feelings about this. And then toward the end of the workshop, if people want to, they've got an opportunity. Most of my workshops, they have an opportunity to set up their own still life, with some guidance, some support from me. And once some of the mystery has been taken out of it, both by my lessons and slide presentations and by just watching me do it for 3 days. So no one has to set up a still life in my still life workshops, which I think is a huge bonus because, setting up a still life doesn't have to be a lot of pressure, but it sure can feel like it. And another huge bonus of conducting workshops that way is that you end up in a scenario where two, maybe three artists are painting from, have chosen to work from the same option on the table. And so we get to really delve into how two unique individuals approach the same problem, displaying their artistic fingerprint very clearly in comparison to the other painter working from the same still life. And that's a beautiful thing to witness and observe. So you can tell I'm excited about my adventure coming up, teaching 2 workshops in 1 trip. After this trip, Scottsdale in April, my next workshop with openings is in June in the Boston area. I'm teaching that metal and glass workshop that I mentioned, but I've got 2 workshops that I'm teaching that week. So if metal and glass sounds like a real scary bummer to you, you can think about joining me there in Massachusetts for just my dynamic still life workshop, where we'll paint mostly organic shapes, fruits and vegetables, some opportunity to explore special textures for sure, especially if you're really interested in it, but not with the overly specific focus on metal and glass. Now let's lighten up and make a hot spot there, right around our main character, these 2 little guys down here. Nope, making a mess of my white. There we go. And it would be really fun is to put some yellow in that. Make it green. Anytime you add another color to something, though, you're probably darkening it. Let's lighten it again. And the more times you touch something, the more you kind of take the magic away. All right, I think I'm good. I'm about good here. Thanks for letting me babble to you about upcoming workshops. If you're a person who likes to paint still life from reference photos, but again, not a real huge fan of setting up your own still life, think about checking out my Patreon. My Patreon page has tons and tons of still life reference photos that you can use copyright free to create your own work. A new pack of them comes out every month, and that can be had on Patreon at the $5 tier. At the $10 tier, you get lots of great videos like this one, including varnishing and framing tips and all kinds of other random stuff. Awesome. Thanks for joining me today. This was a great warm up exercise. I had a lot of fun. Take care.